Prismatic looks like it's going to be an absurdly powerful tool given to us this coming Tuesday along with the rest of the final shape. I'm iYogert, and today I wanted to start a trilogy of videos for the builds I'm going to be using on each subclass after I complete the campaign and have full access to the Prismatic kit. Let's start today with Hunter, as this is the class I'm going to be taking into the Day 1 raid and have spent the most time build crafting for. Remember that this is all speculation, but if I end up making any major changes, I'll be sure to put them in the pinned comment down below. Let's get started. Most good builds in Destiny 2 start with an exotic, and then you choose your abilities, aspects, and fragments based on that. With this build, and what I assume most of Prismatic will be like, is that we should choose things that make a powerful standalone subclass, and then slot in exotics that amplify and complement those decisions. In this case, let's take Shadowshot Tether for our super. I said in my last video how I loved Orpheus Riggs Hunter and the regen it grants us, and the normal downside of running this tether is that Void Hunter's neutral game doesn't have as many options as something like Solar or Arc. With Prismatic though, this is going to be far less of a problem, as we can steal the best parts of the Arc and Solar kits and then pair it with our tether. That being said, let's take combination blows for our melee alongside with Gambler's Dodge for our class ability. This has been the peanut butter and jelly of Arc Hunters for years now, and we're going to add the metaphorical honey to this with the rest of the Prismatic kit. Lastly, let's finish out our abilities with Grapple. This is going to be our way into and out of fight and is going to help us close gaps on enemies and move around the battlefield, while also providing a way to deal dark damage with our abilities. This is going to be important as we need to be dealing both light and dark damage types in order to fill both sides of our Transcendence bar quickly. And while initial reviews say that the Hunter's Transcendence is going to be the weakest of the three classes, I think it's still going to be very important in high-end content. Our first aspect is going to be Winter's Shroud, which simply reads, dodging slows nearby targets. This is normally a very lackluster PvE aspect, as Stasis Hunters normally have way better ways to slow targets that don't also put them in as much danger. However, when we pair it with combination blows and Gambler's Dodge, we're going to be rewarded much more for being near enemies. This means we're going to be slowing and freezing all the enemies around us on top of the crazy melee spam. This helps us stay in the fight longer by CCing everything in the area and then destroying them with huge AoE damage when we shatter targets with our buffed melee. Going a step further, we add in Stylish Executioner as our second aspect. This will make us go invisible and grant True Sight upon defeating a target affected by an elemental debuff. Then, after we perform a Stylish Execution, our next melee while invisible will weaken that target. This by itself is an infinite loop of going invis, weakening, and defeating a target, and then going invis again. Added to the rest of the build, though, it's an added 15% from any damage our fire team does, including our melee. So far, that gives us a dodge that slows everything around us, applying an elemental debuff, a charged melee that deals 300% more damage when it's max stacked, and when it kills an enemy, it's going to grant us invisibility, a chunk of our health back, refreshes our dodge cooldown, and sets up our next melee to do 15% more damage to our next victim. That's without mentioning the grapple at all, which is going to help us close the gap safer and retreat if things go south. Now that we have a crazy combo of abilities, let's turn that up to 11 with our fragments, starting with Facet of Protection. This is free damage resist for being within 15 meters of 3 or more enemies, and assuming it's the same values of Spark of Resistance, we're looking at a 25% damage reduction from all sources. This is insanely strong, as this will stack with damage resist from other things like our Resilient stat, our chest armor mods, and other subclass verbs like Woven Mail, Frost Armor, and Void Overshield. You're likely going to see this fragment as a part of most Prismatic builds. Next is Facet of Courage, to deal more damage when we hit an enemy affected by a darkness debuff with a light ability. We're going to be doing this constantly, as combination blows is a light ability, and our dodge will be applying slow, which is of course a darkness debuff. Our third fragment will be Facet of Sacrifice, which will make our final blows give extra darkness transcendence energy when we have a light buff. This will be another way to ensure we're getting a balanced progression towards filling our Transcendence bar, since combination blows is our main focus of the build and will be giving mostly light Transcendence energy. But then I'm sure you're asking, how do we make sure we have a light buff up to proc Sacrifice? Well, we'll be getting light buffs from a few sources, but the first of which is going to be Facet of Purpose. This will grant us Restoration, Woven Mail, Frost Armor, or a Void Overshield when we collect an Orb of Power based on which super we choose. In this case, we'll be getting the Void Overshield because we chose to take Tether, but Restoration is also incredibly strong if you wanted to take Marksman Golden Gun. That leaves us with one fragment slot left, and while there are a few good options, the best of which is Facet of Ruin. This one increases the size and damage we do by destroying stasis crystal and shattering enemies. While we're not making any stasis crystals with this build, we will be doing a whole lot of freezing and therefore shattering of enemies. Bungie is already buffing shatter damage, and this fragment will make it that much more effective. If you're someone in the know, then you may have noticed I didn't pick Facet of Dawn. And while this is another incredibly strong fragment that has great synergy with the rest of our builds, I'm looking to get Radiant from this episode's artifact by using Radiant Orbs. This does exactly what its name would imply, granting us Radiant anytime we pick up an Orb of Power while on a Solar or Prismatic subclass. Radiant is a 25% damage buff, which also counts as another light buff to proc Facet of Sacrifice, and all of this is simply for picking up an Orb of Power, which combination blow hunters are notorious for making boatloads of. While we're talking about the artifact, we might as well cover the rest of the incredibly powerful mods we have here. Void Hegemony?
Hegemony.
Void Hegemony will grant us a small Void Overshield when defeating weakened targets. While I'm sure it's perfectly average size Void Shield, this is mostly to pair with Facet of Purpose in case we need to top off our Void Overshield that gives us. This moves us to one of the potentially most OP mods on the artifact in Shield Crush. We've already covered how we should have nearly constant Overshield and Radiant while using this build, and Shield Crush is going to make it where having these buffs makes our melees and grenades recharge faster and deal more damage. We're not sure on the numbers of these buffs, but it being in the 5th column means that it's almost certainly going to be a pretty high buff, and I cannot wait to see how much better this build feels with it. To finish off the build itself, let's talk about the exotic armor and mods. Starting off with Liar's Handshake gauntlets, as this is going to be our more offensive option. This is another piece that Arc Hunters will be very familiar with, as this gives them an extra buffed melee following their combination blow melee. This means instead of repeatedly alternating dodge and melee, we're going to instead melee twice between dodges. One of these will be our combination blow, and the other one will be our cross counter given to us by Liars. Then the more, I'll call it, consistent option is going to be Orpheus Rigs. And my fire team makes fun of me for how much I like this exotic, but I do honestly think it's one of the most slept on exotics in the game. Deadfall Tether is one of the best at locking down huge waves of enemies, and Orpheus Rigs just means that we can do it whenever we want to. Especially when we throw in the Dynamo and hands-on mods we're going to be running on our helmet. These are going to give us huge chunks of super energy whenever we get a charged melee or dodge near enemy, ensuring we have tether whenever we need it, no matter what exotic we choose to run. Next on gloves, we're going to use either double or triple heavy-handed. These are here to make sure we have constant orbs to fuel both Radiant Orbs and Void
Hegemony,
as well as give us armor charge. For our chest piece, we'll put resistance mods matching whatever damage type we're facing most in the activity we're in. On our boots, let's take recuperation and better already for more healing on orb pickup, and then grab scavenger mod that matches our heavy energy type. Lastly, on my class item, I like to run Special Finisher, Powerful Attraction, and Proximity Ward, but this is probably the most flexible mods in the build. Lastly, I wanted to make a suggested weapons loadout for this build. While your weapons should be tailored and adapted to whatever activity you're doing, this set will be a great all-arounder and should help give you some ideas as to how to choose weapons for yourself. Starting in our kinetic slot, let's get Swordbreaker from the Crota's End Raid. This weapon feels as if it was made for this build. It's strand, so it helps contribute to our Darkness Transcendence energy. It can be crafted with either Demo, Threat Detector, or Pugilist, along with 1-2 Punch. And it has the Cursed Thrall origin trait, so we can shoot a target, it'll give us a little bit of Darkness Transcendence energy, procs our 1-2 Punch, which doubles the following melee's damage. And then this melee will kill almost anything, which procs Cursed Thrall, and reloads the shot we just used if we choose to run the Pugilist trait. If you don't have Swordbreaker, there's no worries. You can always get Wastelander from Dares of Eternities, or any other 1-2 Punch shotgun, as that is the main usage of this weapon. In our energy slot, I have 2 suggestions, both of which are going to be exotic pulse rifles. The first of these is Graviton Lance, which is seeing some play even now, far before the buffs that are coming to pulse rifles in the final shape. This one is going to be our AoE add clear option, and what you'll be starting off this build with. That is until you get the Red Death reformed. Llama has an excellent video on this covering all the strengths this weapon has, and it looks to be cracked, especially in harder content. If you haven't seen that video or just don't know, Red Death will be great in harder content due to all of the healing it will give. And the biggest thing both of these weapons provide us is range. While the build has a ton of ways to deal with adds and majors up close, it really struggles to deal with things at longer range like snipers, which are some of the higher priority enemies in in-game content. This leaves us with only our choice in heavy, and this is going to be the most encounter dependent of all of the weapon slots. For something like boss damage, I'm going to be bringing Edge Transit with either Envious Bait and Switch or Cascade Bait and Switch. With all the buffs heavy GLs have received, they've passed even rockets for the DPS crown, while also dealing more total damage. That being said, legendary rockets when paired with a Gallarhorn are insane for AoE ad clear and nuking champs and mini bosses. And the best rocket for this particular use case will be Semiotician from Season of the Witch. Semiotician can be crafted with bipod and field prep for insane rocket reserves and ammo economy. Then we have things like machine guns, swords, and linear fusion rifles. While there are good options for each of these weapon families, and swords are heavily featured in the artifact, I'm not quite sold on using these over GLs and rockets for 90% of content in the game. I'll eat my words if I'm wrong, but I guess we'll see on Tuesday. I hope you're as excited as I am to try this build. While I still claim to be a Warlock main, I've really enjoyed playing Hunter during practice with my team for the day one, and I think this build will be great on day one and for anything beyond that. If you did enjoy today's video, a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated, and tell me in the comments which class I should do next for Prismatic build. Until next time, I hope to see all about the tower.